history. And so I'm actually ultimately very pleased with how this worked out, and I hope that you will be too. So yeah, that's my announcement about the change of plans. We're going to have a roundtable discussion instead of a lecture about the history of the rise and fall of the Ku Klux Klan in Northeast Ohio. I planned this program in partnership with the Trumbull County Historical Society, and I'm going to ask Director Meg Reed to wave at you, who is here representing the Trumbull County Historical Society. Yeah. We planned this program to coincide with the anniversary of a critically important event in local history, the so-called Niles Riot, which took place on November 1st, 1924. You're going to hear about this incident in much more detail later, but its impact is incredibly significant as it essentially ended the power of the Ku Klux Klan in our region. This is a difficult subject matter, so I believe it's important here at the beginning to state our intentions for this program. We are not here to offer any justification for the actions of the KKK. We are scholars, and our intent is to provide insight into the causes and consequences of this transformative historical event. Our conversation this evening will adhere to YSU's policy of non-discrimination in civil discourse. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, which I'm proud and excited to do because I think this group really embodies the value that the YSU history program brings to our community. Each one of these scholars trained at Youngstown State University and dedicated their time and talents to preserving and promoting the rich cultural heritage of our valley. And in their own ways, each also works to inspire new generations of students and researchers to pursue this really important work. So first, I'll introduce myself. Again, I am Dr. Amy Fluker. I specialize in the history of the American Civil War era, and I also teach the history of Ohio here at YSU. So enough about me. Next, we have Sean Posey. Sean holds a master's degree in history from YSU. He's a freelance writer, historian, and librarian. He is also a very sought-after public speaker and author of multiple books on the history of Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley. Next, we have Steve Viglio. Steve is a training educator, and he also holds a master's degree in history from Youngstown State University. I was very proud to direct his master's thesis, which is entitled The Ku Klux Klan in Northeast Ohio, the Crusade of White Supremacy in the 1920s, which received our department's Outstanding Graduate Research Award. And finally, we have Dr. Martha Planty. Dr. Planty is professor of history here at YSU and holds the Darling Endowment in History. She specializes in social and cultural history with an emphasis on race and identity. She is the author of numerous publications that explore the history of Italian Americans and their communities here in the Valley. And she is the foremost expert on the so-called Niles Riot. So this is our panel, and again, I'm very, very excited for how this all came together this evening. I thought I would begin our panel, if I may, by just providing some brief history of the Ku Klux Klan as an organization, as it formed, and what the organization was like by the time we approach 1924, and this crucial, again, so-called riot that takes place in Niles. So as many of you probably know, the Ku Klux Klan first emerged in Tennessee in 1866, right after the conclusion of the American Civil War. It's organized by ex-Confederates who are embittered about their defeat in that conflict, angry about Reconstruction, and violently opposed to the racially progressive policies of Reconstruction, namely the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which ended the institution of slavery and provided citizenship for African Americans and the right to vote for Black men. Ex-Confederates believed that they had lost much of their real political power as a consequence of this, certainly power that they had enjoyed under slavery to treat Black people as property. That's the power that they are lacking now in the post-war world, and it makes them very, very resentful. So the first Ku Klux Klan emerges as a consequence. It is inherently tied to something historians call redemption, which was the effort, again, of ex-Confederates and white Southern Democrats to try to seize power from Republicans and basically restore white rule in the post-Civil War South. While Reconstruction was ongoing, Black Southerners had some protection from federal authorities. Basically, although we think of the Civil War as ending in April 1865, there's no official cessation of hostilities, which gives the US government the power to oversee the ex-Confederate states as essentially an occupied territory. So it means military rule is in effect there. And while the US military is on the ground in the South, while radical Reconstruction is underway, and while the US military and the Freedmen's Bureau are there to help protect formerly enslaved people, African Americans build and capitalize upon those protections to exercise their right to vote and to gain public office, which they do in tremendous numbers. And again, it's this kind of social and political change that has so upset these ex-Confederates. They turn to tactics of terror and violence to try to intimidate these Black Southerners. What follows then is a response from the federal government. This is really important to understanding how we get to the Ku Klux Klan in the Midwest in the 1920s. The Reconstruction South Klan is pretty effectively suppressed in 1870 and 1871 by a series of laws enacted by Congress called the Enforcement Acts, or sometimes the Klan Acts. And basically, these laws gave the federal government the power to prosecute Klan crimes as federal crimes. And the language of the laws is very interesting. Essentially, they said, if you are committing a crime that is intended to violate the civil rights of an American citizen, and if you're committing that crime in a disguise, you can be prosecuted by a federal court, by a federal judge. You can be arrested and detained by US Marshals. So it takes, right, the power to enforce the law away from Southern, officials who might be in favor of the Klan, and gives that power to federal agents. And it is incredibly effective, actually, in suppressing the Klan. So as a consequence of those enforcement acts, the Klan ceases to exist in the South for a while. So again, from 1866 to 1870, the Ku Klux Klan is mainly situated in the South. It's mainly made up of ex-Confederates, but those enforcement acts are ultimately pretty effective in suppressing the Klan. That brings us, though, to the 20th century. The Ku Klux Klan reemerges famously in the city of Atlanta in 1915. And this second iteration of the Klan shares many things with the first post-Civil War Klan, but their agenda, for lack of a better word, sort of expands. The second Klan, as it's called, is no longer exclusively targeting African Americans as their enemies. They will, of course, continue to target African Americans, but they are also opposed to immigrants, to Catholics, to Jewish people, to pacifists, and to communists. So their list of enemies sort of broadens in the 19-teens. They are advocating what they call 100% Americanism. And their version of 100% Americanism, who counts as an American in the eyes of the Ku Klux Klan, is somebody who's, of course, white and somebody who is Protestant. That's who they identify with most. This second iteration of the Klan, although it reemerged again in Atlanta, it soon spreads well beyond the Deep South. And it spreads far and wide into the Midwest in particular. By 1925, the Ku Klux Klan claimed 5 million members nationwide. I made a little list here. The states of Oregon, Indiana, Colorado, Texas, and Arkansas had known Klansmen serving as governors. Texas elected a Klansman to the Senate. The Ohio Klan claimed to be the largest of any of the Klan state organizations in this era, and Klan members served on city councils, school boards, and as I'm sure we're going to hear, as local mayors. So that was the information I wanted to provide about sort of the background of the Klan getting us to the 1920s. I'd like to turn things over now to Sean to share a little bit of more local history with you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll reiterate a little bit of this. So the Klan in the Youngstown area, as she mentioned, the Klan is reborn in 1915 by this guy named William Joseph Simmons, who is a bit of he was a preacher, he was a salesman, he called himself a colonel. a very strange kind of character, almost somebody that you might have seen come out of a carnival, like a Colonel Tom Parker or something like that. And Simmons leads his followers up to the top of Stone Mountain, Georgia. Now, Stone Mountain, Georgia, if you've ever been there, there's actually a big carving on the side of the mountain of the some of the top leaders of the Confederacy. I think Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, and I think some others. And it remains there today, and it's a very contentious kind of monument, unofficial monument to the Confederacy. So this is where the Second Klan is born. They go up and they burn the cross. And some of the things that we think about the Klan today are actually products of the Second Klan. So if you go online and Google some of the Ku Klux Klan ephemera from the 19th century, the hoods and everything look different. The Klan of the post-Civil War era were kind of, they called them night riders sometimes. It was very secret. They came out at night. They assaulted and flogged African Americans. Now, this is something that you would also see with the Second Klan too, at least especially in the South, though not so much around here. And they were almost kind of a secretive terrorist organization that did not do things like the Second Klan would do, like march in public. Famously, you may have seen a photograph, I think in 1925 or 1924, the Klan actually marched through Washington, D.C. And those photographs are, of course, obviously very too shocking to modern eyes. But this goes to show you, as you mentioned, the Klan always kind of inflated its numbers, or at least we think it did. But they claimed 4 million members in, let's say, if that's correct, in the 1920s. That sounds like it would be a lot today, but think of how much smaller the population was in the 1920s than it was today. So the first Klan is kind of an underground terrorist-style organization, and the second Klan is a very above-ground organization. And in this area, a lot of the people who belong to the second Klan are actually not, but there's been, in the literature, there's been a disagreement over this. But I think now we would say, especially in the case of this area, and I'm basing some of this off of the really good research done by William Jenkins, who I believe is still alive, is a former professor at YSU and who wrote the book Steel Valley Klan. So if you're at all interested in this, pick that book up. He was writing about it for many years before that, I think going back to the 70s. So there's a lot of very good research in there. But in the 1920s, the Klan had their headquarters in the Erie Terminal building downtown. And some anti-Klan forces broke in and stole at least part of the membership list. There was about 2,500 names on it. Jenkins thinks that there was probably, there could have been between 5,000 and 10,000 Klan members in the Youngstown area, maybe more. Once again, we don't know. But he went and analyzed the names in the list, and the Klan, in their, thanks to the Klan, they actually listed people's occupations too. So some of the original people who wrote about the Klan, like in the 60s, said it was a working class movement. So the idea behind the 1920s Klan was that you had working class Protestant whites who felt resentful and thought that they lacked the upward mobility that they should have. And hence the Klan was kind of a reactionary, conservative working class movement. Now, what Jenkins and some other scholars pointed out, especially with the Youngstown stuff, because we have some statistical information to look at, that the Klan here was actually all over the place. There were working class people in it. There were middle class people in it. There were petty bourgeois people, small business owners. Really, the only people who weren't all that well representative were the most elite stratum of the local area. Anybody know why that would have been? It's an interesting question. Right, yeah. You're out of it. You're not allowed to say anything. Anybody have an idea? So people like Joseph Butler, if you're familiar with him, and the industrial upper class of the area, especially those who worked in the steel industry, who did they really rely on at the time? Immigrant labor. So at least until World War I, you have, in the case of Youngstown, which by the 1920s is one of the highest percentage, maybe the highest percentage of foreign-born citizens of any city in the country, all these people are coming over here, basically these peasant people from Central Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, to work in the steel mills. So the steel mill executives are reliant on immigrant labor to basically work in the very, very tough and demanding and not very well compensated jobs in the steel industry. In fact, in 1919, during the Great Steel Strike, the first big steel strike across the United States, where there's like 250,000 steel workers that go out on strike. Albert Gary, who was the head of U.S. Steel, and the guy that they named Gary, Indiana from, if you're familiar with Gary, Indiana, another steel town very similar to Youngstown, he actually broached the idea of pressuring the government into allowing what they called Asiatic peoples, or people of Asian origins, into the country so that they could fill in the gap in immigrant labor caused by World War I, which was very controversial, as we'll talk about a little bit, because there was a lot of extreme prejudice, especially out west, towards people of Asian origins at that time. So the financial interests of people like Joseph Butler were basically going against the idea of the Klan. So obviously it was not like their notions of equality were what we would consider to be equitable today, but they were very much in need of immigrants to work in the steel companies. But there are still a lot of what they call the better classes of Youngstowners, Protestants that ran local businesses and that were very well known, who were on this list. So that's an important thing to think about the Klan, because today we think about the Klan as a very like backwoods, backwater, very, very working class movement. But this is not really the case for the 1920s Klan. So Joseph Simmons starts this organization, the Rebirth of the Klan, in 1915. And by 1920, there's maybe only about 6,000 members, 10,000 members across the United States. It's actually not really growing at the pace he wants to. And what he basically does is kind of outsource recruitment to a couple of organizers who basically set up almost like an advertising or marketing agency, and they send out these people called Kleagles. The weird thing about the Klan of the 20s was everything had a K after it. Like the Canfield Country Club, there was an idea they wanted to build a country club in Canfield for their membership, people who actually probably would never belong to one of the upper class country clubs, but it was KKK, Canfield Country Club. And of course, Kleagles, they had all these weird verbiage going on. So these Kleagles went across the United States recruiting people into the organization. And I think they got something like $4 out of every $10 that somebody had to pledge to become a member. So there was a financial incentive, if you were a Kleagle, to go out and bring people into the Klan. And the thing about the Klan at the time was, and Jenkins talks about this a lot in his book, was depending on the region of the country you were and the situation on the ground, the Klan acted differently. So it took a look at the local area and responded to some of the prejudices there to build up his power. So in some parts of the United States, they might be focused on the local African American community. But in places like Colorado, where the Klan was very big, there was hardly any African Americans living there. So the Klan here, even though the African American population was growing, was primarily, of course, based in the Protestant community. And it was really focused on enforcement of prohibition. In 1919, the Volstead Act was passed. And there was a big dry movement in Ohio going on at the time. The Anti-Saloon League was founded in, I think, Oberlin during that time. And I always forget his name, Wayne Wheeler, who became the head of the Anti-Saloon League. The Anti-Saloon League was probably the organization most responsible for getting the Volstead Act passed. Wayne Wheeler was up from Brookfield. So there was a strong dry movement in Ohio. And even by the 1920s, as the population here was getting more and more diverse, there was still a strong Protestant community. Most of the Klan's membership would end up coming from the south side of Youngstown. So even though they had a lot of their activities out in Canfield, you got to remember at the time, very few people lived in Canfield. Most of these people were actually from the south side of Youngstown. So the Dry Act is a big part of it. And of course, you have a lot of Catholic immigrants coming in who really don't agree with the idea of prohibition. They don't see anything wrong with drinking a little bit of wine. They also don't agree with the ideas of what they called the Sunday laws or the blue laws. Anybody ever heard of the blue laws? not very well known today. I remember years ago, I worked at Giant Eagle in Canton, and they had a rule where on Sundays you couldn't sell anybody any wine until noon. Which was I was like, well, where did this come from? And I asked around or whatever. And one of the real older guys that worked there said, that's part of the old blue laws, which I had never heard of. The blue laws were basically an idea that these really pious Protestants, the type of people who would join the Klan here, wanted to enforce. The idea on Sunday was a day of what? Sunday was a day of prayer. Sunday was the day of the Sabbath. And you didn't do things like, you certainly didn't drink. You didn't play baseball. In fact, there was for a while playing baseball on Sunday was very gauche here in Youngstown. You didn't go out to the vaudeville theater, which of course the middle class tended to look down on. That was kind of a working class thing. There was a lot of things you didn't do on Sunday. Maybe you go to the movie theater in general. Movies were just, of course, you still had silent films at the time. So this is a big thing of what the Klan is trying to do. It's basically trying to take these very Protestant beliefs, not just Protestants, because there are Protestants who speak out against the Klan, very pious Protestant beliefs, and force it on the immigrant population here. And of course, the big part of that was the Catholic Church. The idea too of the Pope, all of the Catholic immigrants here in the United States were foot soldiers of the Pope. And the idea that even to a certain extent existed when Kennedy was elected in the early 1960s, that, you know, you would get a Catholic in the White House and the Pope in Rome would be telling him what to do. Well, this was very big at the time. And right over here next to us, St. Columba's Church was a focus of a lot of that. There was a lot of conspiracy theories around the idea that every time a Catholic child was born, this was a big one in the area that the Klan pushed, the father would put a gun in the basement of St. Columba's Church, which apparently would be used during the Great Catholic Uprising that was going to come against the local Protestants. All these type of things were in vogue. And this stuff already existed in the community. So what Jenkins points out is the ethnic mix of the community changes extremely rapidly between like 1880 and 1890 in the 1920s. There's a lot of turnover. It goes from a Protestant, Anglo, Welsh, and German community to all of a sudden all these immigrants are coming in. And there's a lot of people who are not getting adjusted to this very well, especially the idea of all these Catholic immigrants. So the Klan here looks at the landscape and decides basically this is what the issues it's going to organize around the Kliegels. And it's very, very successful. And by 1921, there's already rumors that the Klan is in the area and that it's organizing. And interestingly enough, City Council in 1921 makes a proclamation speaking out against the Klan. And a couple years later, the Klan captures like 5 out of the 6 city council seats and elects the mayor. So within a very short period of time, the Klan basically seizes power in the Youngstown area. So whoever it was that was doing the organizing was very adept. And to give you some idea of the percentages of foreign-born citizens in the area during this time, East Youngstown, which had very little Klan activity. In fact, we think the Klan basically gave up on East Youngstown because over half of the people in East Youngstown were foreign-born. So there was no base of operations for the Klan during that time. Struthers, about 25% of people were foreign-born. Niles, 25%. Girard, 23%. Warren was only 17.3%, but also the Klan would succeed in electing a Klan-backed candidate as the mayor in Warren as well, in Trumbull County. So Warren and Youngstown, the Klan takes political power over both areas. The Vindicator reported that the Klan got its foothold in Ohio in Cincinnati. And I'm not sure if there's a book about it, but Dayton in particular became a Klan hotbed, maybe one of their strongest bases in Ohio, at least certainly in southern Ohio. And it would take some time, very, very little time actually, for the Klan to come up here. And there was a couple of different things that pushed the Klan. There was an organization called the Social Betterment Committee of the Federated Councils of Churches. And a local pastor, Reverend Archibald, I think it was Reverend Archibald Cox, played a leading role in that. He agreed wholeheartedly with the Klan on immigration while disagreeing with the idea of having an organization based around oaths and secrecy. So one thing Simmons, when he rebirthed the Klan in 1915. He realized that fraternal organizations were very big in this time period. So think about the Masons and the Odd Fellows and secretive societies. And the Klan kind of took this idea and ran with it. So you would get sworn into the Klan. They had all these bizarre titles like Exalted Cyclops. There were the robes. There was the burning of the crosses. But there was also the idea that you were a member of something important and unique. So they played on this idea that was popular in the culture of fraternal organizations. Interestingly, Cox gave a pretty interesting speech to Protestants in which he said, when he was criticized for saying anything nice at all about the Klan, this gives you some idea about how some of the mainstream Protestant thought was. He said, quote, "The Klan believes in the supremacy of the white race. The Klan believes in the separation of the church and state. If there is a Baptist here tonight who does not believe in these principles, let him appear before the church next Thursday night and we will kick him out." So this is really what he's talking about there. He's talking about the Baptist faith, but this is the mainstream thinking and the Klan as well. And this is what the Klan starts to play on. And even though there was a small African-American population here, the Klan didn't do a whole lot in general to them, but there was an article that I found in the Vindicator in which an anonymous Klansman was interviewed by the Vindy, and the Vindy, to its credit, was very anti-Klan in their editorial stance. The Telegram covered, the Youngstown Telegram was the other newspaper at the time. They covered the Klan, but they didn't have a big editorial stance. The Warren Tribune had no editorial stance in regard to the Klan, and Jenkins puts forward the idea that there may have been advertisers that threatened the Tribune who were in bed with the Klan or friendly with them, that, advertising could be pulled out of the newspaper if they went out and said a lot against the Klan. So that's why we know less about the Trumbull County Klan than we do the one in Youngstown. This Gibson, who I was telling you of, he led a rally of 10,000 people in Wick Park for, quote, civic righteousness. He was a member of the Klan, along with a guy by the name of D.C. Hamilton, who was the treasurer of the Civic League. The Civic League becomes like a front group for the Klan in Youngstown. And there's a newspaper that emerges called The Citizen, which writes a lot about moral reform and enforcing the dry laws and the Sunday laws. And over time, it eventually becomes kind of the de facto Klan newspaper in town. And in 1923, there's a big push to get a Klan slate elected to office. And it's very successful, including the mayor, Charles Scheibel, I can't remember how to pronounce it, is elected. I think 5 out of the 6 council seats go to the Klan, and the Klan takes control of the Board of Education. So that's an important thing to remember. The Vindicator stated at the time that a Klan victory would, quote, be a great misfortune for Youngstown. It would mean a city government gratefully influenced, if not controlled, by men meeting in secret beyond the reach of public opinion and law, and bent on sowing discord in the community. But by 1924, Martha will talk about later, when the Klan, the partial membership list of the Klan is stolen and publicized, this scares a lot of people who were involved in the Klan who thought they could do this type of stuff in secret. After the Niles riot, too, this is another blow against the Klan, where the Klan basically is driven out of Niles and made to look rather badly. So the Klan really starts to decline even by 1925, but I was still able to find a lot of stuff in the Vindicator about the Klan existing, especially in the Canfield area, almost to the Great Depression. And I think really by the Great Depression, with the collapse of the economy and a change in focus on material economic circumstances, the Klan itself basically dies out and isn't really reborn until the coming of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. That's where you get the Third Klan. And the Third Klan is basically trying to keep the Jim Crow laws in force and smash the civil rights movement. So first Klan, this is the second Klan, this is the third Klan. Another reason why the Klan here failed was it never succeeded in enforcing the dry laws or enforcing the Sunday laws or convincing by threats or any other means of the immigrant population to conform to the idea of pious Protestantism. It fails, basically. And probably a lot of people in the organization realizes that, and it dwindles away, basically. And the national Klan itself is disgraced later in the 1920s when a guy by the name of, there was a power struggle between Hiram Evans, who was the head of the Klan, who actually spoke at the Canfield Fair, by the way, the head of the national Klan, shows you the power the Klan had here, and a guy by the name of D.C. Stevenson, who ended up raping and I think murdering a woman and was put on trial for it and sentenced basically to life in prison. And this was kind of also a recognition that the Klan, while claiming to be this pious organization, was actually filled with people who were hucksters and even rapists and murderers. And the Klan is basically morally defames itself. So that, in really short, is a story of the second Klan here in Youngstown.
All right, thank you. Okay, so, well, in my thesis 3 years ago, I had covered both the Youngstown and the Akron Klan, but I'll just cover the Akron Klan. In the 20s and early 20th century, Akron was known for a lot of manufacturing stronghold. There was a stronghold for that, and the big thing was the rubber factories. And the Klan's popularity in Akron was directly related to a demographic change that occurred both with African Americans and white Appalachians moving up to the area looking for better, higher paying jobs from the South and from Europe. The population in Akron grew by over 700%. The African American population grew by over 700%. With a larger overall trend in population growth as Akron's overall population grew 202% to a total of 208,435 from 1910 until 1920. And then Appalachian whites came up and outnumbered blacks 20-1 as those migrants came primarily from West Virginia, from Kentucky, looking for higher paying jobs in the specifically in the rubber factories. With that influx of migrants also came overcrowding in Akron and a lot of resentment towards the migrants for the idea of them stealing jobs and African Americans stealing jobs, from the Protestant whites that were like you had alluded to before, Sean. And it also resulted in higher crime, housing shortages, and dilapidated living conditions. The factory owners welcomed the migrants, of course, but like I said, a lot of local citizens didn't, and they felt that the hordes of migrants were overcrowding the city and lowering the wages. And they also blamed the increasing crime on those newcomers. And I think in Youngstown it was the same way, but in Akron, the religious leaders played a part in getting their congregations to join the Klan and using their pulpits to present their message to a wider audience. And a lot of the religious leaders became members of the Klan, such as Reverend O.A. Henry, who was a pastor at the South Akron Church of Christ, and he actually delivered a national Klan headquarters message that Akron and Summit County were considered the best Klan area in the country. And then 10 days later, on November 27th, 1923, the Klan basically interrupted an assembly at South High School in Akron and then presented the principal, C.J. Bowman, with a flag and a Bible as the Klan intended it to be read in the schools. That was one of their big issues. They wanted compulsory Bible study and Bible reading in public schools. And the Klan also presented similar gifts to other schools in the area in 1923. And that was the big year that they had a big push to try and get control of the Akron Board of Education in the election that year in 1923. The Akron school system was overcrowded as it was, and the Board of Education had earlier proposed building a new South High School in January, but some citizens and leaders were opposed to that idea, to the new building. And that same year, the Klan, like I said, endorsed 3 of their own as nominees to the Board of Education, and because they wanted an enlargement of the present high school and the erection of a smaller building on the premises. And all three of those candidates won the election of that year, which gave them a majority of power on the Board of Education. And then on August 1st, 1924, the Klan was actually able to impose compulsory Bible reading in the public schools through a resolution that was passed through their majority Board of Education. And of course, Jewish and Catholic organizations opposed that resolution in Akron. And then in December, the non-Klan board member, Harry Huber, resigned his seat, which paved the way for another Klan member to get his seat. And then on January 5th, 1925, they won that seat. And when Charles Sweeney was elected a Klan member, Charles Sweeney was elected to fill that vacancy left by Huber. And then in June of 1925, the majority Klan was able to get their own member, George McCord, elected as the new superintendent of the Akron City Schools, which gave them a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of political power and a lot of stroke in the city, more than they already had. They tried to bar Catholics from teaching in public schools. The ultimate goal of the Klan, however, in the city was complete school segregation, which they ultimately were not able to achieve that. There were three non-Klan members left on the board, and they all resigned when George McCord was appointed as superintendent. The general consensus overall in the city was that it was very divisive and divided, as some people felt that McCord was he's using his political power as a Klan member to influence everything, and some people were disapproved of that, such as the Akron Rotary Club and the Chamber of Commerce. The former board member that resigned, H.T. Waller, then led a Keep Politics Out of School movement that was against the Klan infiltration of the school system. So there was a pushback towards when McCord got the superintendent position. Okay, by the 1925 election, the Board of Election Education now had 4 vacancies that were to be voted on by the Akronites. So now we're at a precipice where we don't know if the Klan is going to be able to keep control of the power in the Board of Education. And ultimately, the Klan was only able to fill one of those vacancies in the election, and they lost their majority on the Board of Education. So under George McCord as superintendent, the city schools, the Akron City Schools, didn't really improve. In fact, they continued to be overcrowded, and conditions actually worsened. There were teachers that had classrooms as many as 70 students. Believe me, like even 20, 22 students is a ton. I can't imagine what 70 would be like, to be honest. Some students didn't have desks, and they were forced to learn sitting on the floor, and others sat double seated in their chairs, and rooms were often other rooms were converted into classrooms, including basements of other buildings. And even one school in the area used portable units like vans to house classes, as congestion was only it was slated to increase as the time went by. He failed to improve public schooling despite the attention given to him by the Klan members. Clown members, yeah, you could call it that. In fact, McCord's election acted as a catalyst, like I said, for the Klan to lose their majority on the board. And that basically marked the beginning of the end of the Klan's traction in Akron. When there was dissension, there was another, later on in the, I believe as the 20s went by, there was dissension in the ranks of the Klan over political dealings, over endorsements, and the group split into 2 factions. All the Summit County Klan members resigned and formed what's called the Buckeye Civic Association, which led to infighting and court battles over which group controlled the assets that were how the assets were to be, the Klan assets were to be distributed. The Klan members, the Summit County Klan claimed that members who left the group had forfeited their rights to the assets once they left. The battle ultimately went to the Ohio Supreme Court, and all the assets were ordered to remain with the Summit County Klan. So that battle over the assets ultimately destroyed the Klan and the BCA completely. And by the end of 1926, attendance at Klan meetings only ranged from 150 to 400 members, from a time in the early 20s where they were the biggest, they were ranked as the biggest city or Klan stronghold in the country. Like I said, by 1926, Klan membership was down to an estimated 2,000 members compared to 24,233 in late 1923. And then by 1928, there was I don't know if Martha's going to allude to this later, but there was an unmasking mandate that took away the anonymity that they once had, that kind of took away a lot of their power, and a lot of members left after that. And as of March 1929, the Akron Beacon Journal had labeled the Akron Klan as extinct. So, I mean, the big portion of it was the early to mid 1920s, and George McCord, ultimately becoming superintendent, kind of did them in and was the nail in the coffin. All right, there you go, Martha.
Thank you. I got to stand up. Anybody who knows me knows that sitting for more than 15 or 20 minutes is real punishment for me. So I'm going to stand and talk. What I want to do is a little bit different. I want to talk about what the Ku Klux Klan looks like from the other perspective in the Valley. And this story is really very personal to me. My dad was 4 years old when the Klan marched on Niles. His memory of it and the events leading up to it is really very skewed. His family had moved from the east side of Niles, where most of the Italian and Italian Americans lived, to the north side of town. Just at that point was what was the city limits. And some of his earliest memories, I mean, he's a toddler. He's 3, 4 years old. How many of us have really clear memories of that? But one of his memories was that occasionally through the summer of what we've now talked about and identified as 1924, his mom would go and get he and the 7 of his siblings that still lived at home. He was the 9th out of 10 kids, so there were a lot of them. And she would make them all come into the dining room and cluster them under the dining room table, because there were folks at the just beyond the city limits, on the hill just beyond their house, burning crosses in the night. And so for me, this is really personal. So what's going on and what does it look like from the other side? So my research partner and I, Donna de Blasio, have done a lot of work on what the Italian American community in particular, and immigrant communities in general, look like during the 1920s. And what we know, and Sean has given you the statistics, that this area in particular is very heavily populated by immigrants. Niles is a really kind of peculiar situation, because while there's an immigrant population of about 25%, the 1930 census tells us that not only is there a very significant immigrant population, by that time, given the attrition and death, it drops to about 20%. But another 20% are the descendants of those first immigrants. So what we've got in Niles is a very mature immigrant community by the middle of the 1920s. And they represent probably 30% of the whole population. What makes them in some ways unique is that, like most immigrants to this area, and this is something that Donna and I have found, and it plays an important role in this interpretation, is that in industrial communities where the only source of occupation is heavy industry, the production of iron and steel, something very peculiar happens. While there's real competition by immigrants for jobs, and they do get paid slightly less, the need to fill those positions creates sort of an artificial situation, sort of a bubble over the area where immigrants, and for that matter, those African Americans that are here, are paid equitably or almost equitably with their, in quotes, native born counterparts. According to the US Census, 96% of all iron and steel workers made well above the national average for wages, and that if you're working full-time, it's more than enough to support a family independently, that no one else has to work. The other thing that's peculiar about iron and steel production is that there's really nowhere for women or children to work. And given that situation, there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity by women. More specifically, what do you do with a kid if they can't work in the mill until they're 16? Well, the answer is you send them to school. So that by 1924, the Youngstown area, Mahoning Valley writ large, including Niles, has an extraordinarily well-educated population. And most of the folks between the ages of, say, 18 and 35 are not immigrants, but the children of immigrants. Most of them born here in the United States or naturalized when their fathers are naturalized. We also know by looking at the census data that the population in Niles in particular, and places like Smoky Hollow here in Youngstown, have an inordinately high percentage of immigrants being naturalized and claiming their rights as citizens. So the Klan message about immigrants being, undereducated, primitive, not good citizens, falls on ears that are not particularly receptive to it. The other thing we've done that's a little bit different is, and I confess I spent 4 years in Italian classes so I could do this, we've been looking at Italian language newspapers here in Youngstown. And what we found is a whole network within the immigrant communities that are really preaching a message that's very, of course, anti-Klan. So, for example, there appears in October of 1924, just weeks before the November 1st riot in Niles, a letter written to Il Cittadino Americano from the local Jewish rabbi from up on Wick Avenue. And what he's basically saying in this is, our religious differences aside, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that our best interests actually lie in combining our forces and combating the Klan. The next week, the editor of the paper writes a long editorial in which he outlines Klan infractions. And basically what he says is that it's not us, it's not immigrants, it's not Catholics, it's not Jews, it's not anybody of our sort that's un-American, that it's the Klan that's un-American, because they seek to deprive us of our rights as American citizens. This message in Niles, with its very mature immigrant population, fell on very fertile ground. The Klan's mantra in Northeast Ohio was that, they were there to root out those that would commit infractions against prohibition. And I got to admit, there is a bootlegging community in Niles. It was centered around the Niles Athletic Club. But the number of people from the community who showed up at the riot far outweighed the number of people who were involved in that group. Now, there were a lot of outsiders. As we approach November 1st, both the Klan and the anti-Klan factions are importing support. The anti-Klan factions in Niles, led by this group of anti-prohibitionists, let's call them that, had called on people of similar sentiments. And it was a group called the Knights of the Burning Circle. And it's in reaction to the Klan burning crosses. One of our oral history informants actually said they were burning tires because they go up nice in flames when you set them on fire, as a symbol to combat the Klan. They had put out a call, and there are records of people coming from places like Steubenville, Pittsburgh, Uniontown, Pennsylvania, to join the anti-Klan forces. Similarly, the Klan had arranged for trains to bring Klan members from Akron in particular, and in large numbers, and from Southeast Ohio. It's estimated, now Niles has a population of about 16 to 18,000 people at the time, that there were 10,000 people there for that riot. Most of the Klan trains were stopped at the city limits by the Knights of the Flaming Circle, or by people who were anti-Klan, and they weren't permitted to get off of the trains, and they were simply sent on to the next destination. The day before the riot, tensions had really come to a kind of boil. The mayor, who, by the way, is a guy named Henry Kissler, was, if not an outright Klan member, the ads supporting his candidacy for mayor in November of 23, most of them were offered by Klan members, and there's in a local paper, there's a huge half-page ad for the Klan advocating for Kissler. He wins a fairly narrow majority, about 500 votes. And during his year preceding the riot in office, he'd permitted a Klan parade in Niles in late spring, which had met some initial resistance, and there was considerable violence, both sides. but not a full-blown incident. Following that, as we go through the summer, tensions continued to heighten. The Klan petitions for a new permit to parade on November 1st. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that it's probably not a good idea. City business owners meet with Kistler and say, you know, you really should call this off, that this is not going to go well for anybody involved, no matter what our politics, no matter what our sentiments are. This is not going to go well for anybody. And we fear property damage, particularly in downtown, and we ask you to call it off. And so Kistler calls a public, he actually does 2 meetings. He calls a public assembly where he asks local business owners to come and talk about their doubts and their concerns. This public meeting is overwhelmingly in favor of canceling the permits. He also calls together what he calls a secret council of 5 people. The 3 city councilmen from each of the 3 wards, the chief of police, a guy named Link Rounds, and ironically, my grandfather, Joseph Polanyi, who was a foreman at one of the local enterprises, the Niles Fire Brick Company. Kistler had thought that it was a foregone conclusion that they would say, because of the 3 council members at least, that the parade should go forward. After some deliberation and discussion, that 5-person group tells Kistler 4-1, cancel the parade permit. At this point, Kistler petitions both the county sheriff in Warren and the governor for additional police. Both of them respond in the negative, basically saying, you've got yourself into this, you get yourself out of it. And Kistler's response is to swear in 40 Klansmen as auxiliary policemen or auxiliary sheriffs to keep the peace. It did not have the intended effect. The night before the first, October 31st, what else should happen on Halloween? Someone places a bomb on Kistler's front porch and blows much of the front porch off of the house. Kistler and his wife are there, but where they were in terms of location in the house is something to be determined. And although was rather primitive, there was a forensic examination of the remnants of the bomb, and they did find some evidence of fingerprint. It didn't match anybody whose fingerprints they had on record from the anti-Klan faction. One of my ongoing questions is, who actually planted the bomb? I mean, it well could have been the anti-Klan faction, because they'd actually said some weeks before, you know, if you continue this, you're going to pay for it. On the other hand, could it have been members of the Klan or Klan sympathizers who planted the bomb to increase sympathy or action on the part of the Klan? It's something we're never going to know. And they certainly couldn't settle it at the time, and I'm not going to try and figure it out from the evidence that I've got. What we do know is the next morning, Kistler's resolve to let the parade go forward is doubled. Something else happens over the course of that time between the bombing and the actual time of the march in the afternoon. Rumor begins to circulate through town that as the Klan marches in, their projected parade route actually took them past the two Catholic churches in town. One, an Irish Catholic church in the downtown area, and the other, an Italian Catholic parish located at the extreme east end of what was then Niles on Robbins Avenue. The rumor circulating is that the Klan intended to ransack the sacristies of the two churches. And at St. Stephen, which is the one downtown, there was also a convent, and that they intended to violate the nuns there. Now, we've discovered this from from 3 or 4 independent oral histories, so we know the rumor is true. We know that the rumor is circulating. We don't know that the rumor is true. And who starts the rumor? Again, we don't know. But it has an unexpected consequence. And that it turns this from a conflict between the Ku Klux Klan, who says its target is, those anti-prohibitionists, those bad bootleggers, into a conflict between the Ku Klux Klan and a grassroots movement in the community. One of the most, I think, heartfelt oral testimonies we've collected about this was from a woman named Grace List. She was 8 or 9 at the time of the riot. And her parents, who were in fact immigrants, lived just north of one of the places where the barricades in town were set up, at the corner of Federal and Main Street. They lived on East Main Street, which took them north toward Warren. When her parents heard the rumor, although they had previously decided, just basically to stay at home and hide, not to engage. They had small children that they didn't want to become involved in this because they were immigrants. They were energized. And that after some discussion, and she describes the debate, her parents decide that they have to go out to the barricades themselves. And this is not just her father, it's her mother. And they leave Grace with her 2 younger siblings saying, lock the doors, here's water, here's food, we'll be back by dinner time. They show up shortly after sundown. When they get there, their message is, we beat them. We turned them back. It was us who did it. And her mother goes on to say that, I was so angry. I pulled the hood off the person standing in front of me. And it was my grocer. That's the level of this conflict and sort of the grassroots nature of it. Following the Niles riot, and in part due to corruption within the Klan, I always describe it to my students as a pyramid scheme, because in very many ways, that's exactly what it is. But the combination of the kind of humiliation that happened in Niles which is at a local level, eats away at the foundation of what these immigrants describe as an anti-American organization. Thank you. I'm going to give this back to Dr.
Please, feel free to get more food and drink and refreshment. And while you're doing that, the panel would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Why crosses? Why are they burning crosses if they're?
The question is, why are they burning crosses?
Not something the first Klan did. The thing about the second Klan, there's a lot of focus on imagery and intimidation, like the masks, the hoods, the marches with torches and all that type of stuff. And yeah, there's religious symbolism there too, but a lot of it was intimidation. In the spring of summer of 1923 in Trumbull County, they lit burning crosses all around Trumbull County in the night. One night, I can't think, it was maybe April or May, and then one in Monument Park in Trumbull County. And it really scared the shit out of people. And that was it was an intimidation factor, I think, most of all. And of course, it's one of the things we remember most about the Klan today, right? The burning crosses. And it's a warning too, right? The Klan is coming. And I think that's mostly what it is. A lot of She Klan is, as Martha mentioned, is like grifting, but a lot of it too is theater, and that's like kind of part of the theater of it.
I mean, they're willing victims of the grift.
Yeah, right,
I mean,
right.
because the message fits with their reality. I do want to take a minute and introduce two people I've been working with this semester. I'm teaching a practicum course, and later this month, we're going to be open.
Question from our students?
Do you know the Klan's involvement in McDonald, Ohio during the 1920s? Sean?
I'm repeating the question for a live stream for Martha's students. The question is if we have information about Klan activity in McDonald.
No, I can't say I know too much about McDonald. Probably.
Question from Allison, and then I see Jace.
So the 1920th century, it's a more radical era of thoughts and actions and everything. Do you think the second iteration of the Klan was doomed to start entering the 20s?
Was the second iteration of the Klan doomed from the start is the question.
The Klan is actually a precursor to is the 1924 Immigration Act, which is a very reactionary bill that basically shuts down immigration as we know it for over 40 years, I think until 1965, like ends immigration from Asia, period. There's like a quota system. So there is a backlash against immigration in the United States that the Klan feeds into. But even when the Klan like crests and then falls, maybe that's the Klan's legacy in some ways, though it probably would have happened anyway, is that 1924 Immigration Act, which is very, very reactionary. And like I said, it's not until the Johnson administration that's basically you get a change into the kind of immigration system we would think of being as more modern. So yeah, in some way, maybe that's their legacy.
Jace?
Is this an event that kind of like breaks through nationally in terms of like the history of the second thing, or is this mostly just note in like local Northeast Carolina history?
The Niles incident in particular. So the question was if the Niles incident made national news, was it national breaking news? Yes, I see emphatic nods. I'll hand it over to Martha.
Yes, it was covered everywhere. We've got a scrapbook upstairs, and I mean, it's covered in major city newspapers, Plain Dealer, Pittsburgh, New York, Chicago. There's even one from Kansas. So yes, I mean, it was an incident that people talked about across the United States.
It's like one of the most noted like pushbacks against the Klan anywhere, like in the United States.
I saw a couple questions over here. Dr. Jackson?
I find it very interesting. I'm actually reading the book, The Black Klansman, who like infiltrated, but I'm always trying to figure out what was the end goal, right? Like, we're wearing hoods, we're hiding around, we're secretly getting put into offices, we don't want to tell people who we are. Like, what did they want to happen? I don't see I'm just trying to figure out intimidation to what? I'm intimidating you because.
The question is about the end goals of the Klan, and my panelists can jump in and add. But certainly, the first iteration of the Klan, it's about political power, and they're wanting political power in all kinds of spaces. The first Klan's very worried about upper level political power. They've lost congressional seats to formerly enslaved people. They've lost governorships to formerly enslaved people. They're losing local elections to Republicans. And that's what they want to put a stop to. And then I think, as you heard, Sean and Steve speak to, their goals here maybe in the 1920s are a little more subtle, though they certainly have, people in power in high office. They see infiltrating school boards and city offices as an important way to get their agenda. And of course, what they want is to block people of color and Catholics and immigrants who are not Christian from changing their way of life. If that's
The second Klan, like in this area anyway, has a very I can never pronounce this word properly, millenarian, like the idea that we're going to cleanse the city and bring in a new pious order, and all of the things that we see as being immoral and unethical, we're going to put an end to. We're going to enforce the dry laws. We're going to enforce the Sunday laws. The Protestant morality that we hold is going to hold sway across all of the communities, basically. I don't think there was an idea that, we're going to, by this time the area was too reverse. They're not going to like push Catholics out of the area or anything like that, but we're going to, as much as we can, try to control the situation from a ethical and moral standards.
I think part of it is also they see their goal, if they can't get rid of the immigrants, Americanization. So, I mean, the easiest thing to do is strip them of their language. Everybody has to learn English. Strip them of their cultural values, and most particularly their religion. And then they're true Americans. I mean, the Horatio Alger series that's so popular through the 1890s to the 1950s, part of the subtext of those is always, don't speak with an accent, speak like a real American, do the things that are really American. These are American values. And I think that notion that we want to make everybody over in our image is also very much a part of it.
I guess I just feel like they already did that. Like I feel like we didn't have black presidents until 2008. You know, you look at Congress, you look at, you know, English being the only language that we recognize, not like bilingual. Like, I feel like the Klan, like, hey, if they just work within the majority, like Jim Crow laws, like that's what America wanted already. Like they probably could have worked within their system and really like.
I think that explains their success.
Yeah.
I finished reading, I talked to Bill about this. I still don't hear about the Klan, but about the head of the Northern Klan that died actually with the federal leadership, which was from Indiana. And my reading was, these were not people that act like the leaders of that. They were political opportunists taking advantage of a message to assume power. They were the most immoral. There was no principle involved except using hate and fear to gain power, to gain money. And the temperance, while they preached things like that, they had drunken parties. They made, and what was it, the whole level, they said, what I read was, Indiana was the most, from the governor on down, they were all members of the Klan. And I was shocked to find how much it penetrated the whole of the North. But the leadership certainly didn't have any belief in any of the ideas that they were using, except that they were very effective in playing on people's hates and fears.
It was basically a comment pointing out the hypocrisy of Klan leadership that's promoting morality, but not always acting in adherence with those values they're professing.
I think there's a historic tendency in the United States and elsewhere for right-wing reactionary movements to be grifts. Like there's always a lot of grift involved. They're true believers, and then there's people who are just grifting for money and power. And obviously the Second Klan was rife with people who were just opportunists, who was, hey, you know, this was the big wave that's coming. Let's ride it into higher office or, you know, into whatever else I want to get out of it. And other than that, I'm not really terribly interested. But, you know, probably the hardcore members were people who did have these religious visions and ideals. And then there were other people who were just there to, you know, try to get into the mayor's office or the governor's office or wherever it is they wanted to go. And then when the movement fell apart, well, then they quickly discarded all that and moved on.
I think I saw a couple hands from my students back here. Tyler, I saw you first.
Before I maybe want to ask a question, you said something that there was Klan activity in Warren, but how far out of the city urban center did it extend? I'm from a suburb of Warren, Allen Township, so did it really penetrate to the suburbs at the time, or was it mostly just in the urban center?
The question was about how far sort of did Klan activity reach in Trumbull County in the areas surrounding Warren?
Actually, there's more support outside of Warren, outside of the sort of urban southern edge of the county, and it's really deep into the more northern townships. That's where its real support came from.
That makes sense, because in Youngstown, the real source of support was the South Side. And if you think about the 1920s, that's like the last part of Youngstown. Well, I mean, the West Side a little bit later, but the South Side really doesn't get developed until about when they build the Market Street Viaduct. So by 1920, you know, the big burst in population in the South Side is very recent, within the past couple of decades. So once again, too, that's a little bit of the hinterlands as far as, you know, today, of course, we have the suburbs and Canfield and all that. But back then, that was a little bit further out than we would think of it being today. So sounds like a little similar to Trumbull County.
Cameron, I saw your hand.
What's the highest political power that either actual Klansman or suspected Klansman have?
Highest political power that a Klansman or suspected Klansman achieved. U.S. Senate.
Hugo Black,
Yeah.
who was a Supreme Court justice, was a member of the Klan. Now, Hugo Black in the Supreme Court was not really, you know, his his ideological position then wasn't terribly indicative of the Klan. So maybe he was just an opportunist, but there was a lot of people who were just involved. But I think that would probably be the highest, even though there was like talk of getting a Klan president at the height. But, maybe they didn't need a Klan president because, like I said, they still got that 1924 Immigration Act and which is something the Klan would have wanted. So I guess they didn't need it.
I mean, I would say the same thing. I would say black and then senator, governor.
Not Woodrow Wilson?
Well, again, yeah, Cameron's question. And again,
He would have been a Klansman maybe in the 19th century. He was, maybe that's what we didn't mention too, was D.W. Griffith's movie, The Birth of a Nation in 1915. That kind of leads to that's kind of the artistic first shot fired in the beginning of the Second Klan. And Wilson shows The Birth of a Nation in the White House and says it's like writing history with lightning. But Wilson, of course, was a Southerner and brought segregation to Washington, D.C. and was very much a racist, white supremacist, and would have been great with the Klan, but he pretty much is a vegetable before the Klan gets into power. But yeah.
yes.
Yes, I was sort of wondering about, and I touched on this a little bit at the time of the Klan in the 20s, sort of the intersection between that and organized labor, as well as perhaps some of the the slow buildup of the mob in the area. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, pre-Niles incident, and then after it, do one of the other two perhaps take some of the organized power from the Klan that
It's a question about the relationship between the Klan and organized labor and organized crime. And I think Sean's probably the best person to.
Well, there was probably a lot of angst about the labor organizing that had been happened here. Now, the steel industry isn't organized at this time, but there's a very big strike in 1915 and 1916 that starts at Republic Iron and Steel and goes into East Youngstown, which is today Camel. And there's a huge riot at the end of that burns down most of the business district of East Youngstown after Youngstown Sheet and Tube Guards fire on the strikers. And that was a national, international news. They brought in the National Guard. And then a few years later, you had the Great Steel Strike of 1919, which was the biggest steel strike at the time. And, we were at the heart of it here. People were killed here. There was violence. And 1919 is a huge strike wave all across the country, like probably the biggest strike wave until the 30s. And with it comes the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and, the Red Scare, like either the first or the second Red Scare, depending on how you think about that. And so the Klan obviously is looking at that too, because these are foreigners, right, who are bringing over foreign religions like Catholicism, and then they're bringing over foreign ideologies like socialism and Marxism. So there's a big fear there too. And of course, the Klan is very anti-union, and in some places, not so much here, at least as far as big events, the Klan was used as strikebreakers too, kind of like the Pinkertons. So yeah, that's another anti-unionization is a big thing because they see that connected to socialism or Bolshevism, and these are foreign ideologies brought here to other people. Even though some of the Klansmen were probably Germans, and it was the Germans that brought Marxism over, but hey, whatever.
Maybe one more question. I see in the back, Dr. Simonelli.
I'm just curious what happened to all the politicians in Akron, Youngstown, and the like, like Kistler and Mayor Youngstown and all. What ended up with their careers? Were they able to decide to keep going, or were they pretty well finished?
What happens to Klan politicians after they're sort of exposed for their involvement in the Klan?
So Kistler is reelected in 25. They were serving 2-year terms then. He sort of disappears after that. His family goes into insurance. So, I mean, and in Niles in particular, there was never really a really strong, visible Klan presence. It was almost always instigated from beyond city limits. So,
Well, I know with George McCord, he was actually fired, I think in 1929, after the issues with the school system didn't improve. And he had a track record. He used to be at Springfield, Ohio. I think he was the superintendent, and he did a terrible job there. He tried to segregate the teachers and tried to make it, what was it? So it was only, so no black teachers could teach in public schools. Was that what it was? Oh, yeah, yes, or they could only teach black kids. So it was very segregated. That's what he wanted in Springfield, and he failed there, bottomed out there, and then ended up coming to Akron and then bottoming out there. So, yeah.
Probably the ultimate thumb in the eye for the Klan was Youngstown was just a few years after the Klan wins power here. Youngstown elects its first Catholic mayor, Heffernan. Yeah, and I think 29 or 28. So that's kind of, I guess, like, the period on the end of, the final decline and collapse of the Klan and their failure really of the Klan here.
Well, I have my eye on the clock, so I think we'll sort of wrap things up there, but I'm sure we'd be happy to, talk with you more as we leave for the evening. I just want to end by saying a few note of thanks, first to Rosa Vega and the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences student workers, as well as the History Club for helping to promote tonight's event. Dr. Palanti for sharing her expertise as well as sponsoring tonight's event and providing our refreshments. And yes, please eat. And the staff of the Youngstown Historical Center of Industry and Labor who very generously accommodated us this evening. And of course, our panelists who came in at the 11th hour and salvaged tonight's event. So please join me in thanking them one last time.